and provide some comments on those. It certainly was really good to hear the member for Lewisham West and Penge remind us all what it's like to be a new mother or a new father, and the uncertainty that we're all faced with at that time, and the lack of access to family members, often mum, who's really good at being there at that time. It was very difficult indeed. And I rise, Madam Deputy Speaker, at a time where we're still waiting for my niece to give birth to her first child. Again, another baby conceived and born in this pandemic period. The first issue I'd like to look at specifically in the report is around childcare. It was, I think, for constituency MPs, one of the most challenging things, where our constituents were trying to balance work and looking after their children, when often their childcare provider wasn't able to provide them with the childcare they needed. Obviously, many nurseries were open for frontline workers, and we applaud them for doing that. And I'd also like to actually applaud the Minister and my honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford, the Minister in charge of childcare, for the work that they did do clearly to try and make sure that the system continued to work even in these very difficult circumstances. And I'm thinking here particularly of recommendations 19 and 20 in the report, where there is a call for a review of funding and lessons learned. And I think there's always a place for learning lessons, and clearly it's been very frustrating for parents to have to try and balance without the childcare that they've come to rely on. But I would like to just place on record that I think that the ministers have done an amazing job at work to make sure that there is continuing free hours available for 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds, even and the funding was there even when settings were closed, and that there continues to be over £3 billion spent on nursery provision. And I hope that all local authorities are doing what they need to make sure that that childcare is secure for the future. But when we look at other areas, particularly the way businesses have dealt with this, we see a less rosy story. I think employers have found it even more challenging than ever to stay within the law regarding their treatment of women who are pregnant or on maternity leave. Now, the government is absolutely clear, and the Secretary of State at the dispatch box in May, when I raised this with him, said that expectant mothers are, as always, entitled to suspension on full pay if a suitable role cannot be found within the workplace. Unfortunately, too many businesses failed to hear that or decided not to correctly interpret it, leaving too many women either incorrectly put onto sick pay or starting maternity leave earlier. And we know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that more women have been made redundant already in this pandemic than men, and mothers are at much higher risk than fathers of being made redundant from this point on. Recommendation 4 calls for clear guidance on the obligations that businesses have in respect to pregnant women who can't safely socially distance at work, reiterating that women have a legal right to full pay, and I fully support the report in that recommendation, albeit businesses should know that already. And then the third item I just want to turn to, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that we need better protection for pregnant women in the first place. And I have to slightly disagree with the report here because at I think it's recommendation 22, there's a recommendation of bringing in the government's recommendations on improving maternity leave. Well, I don't think the government's recommendations are where they should be. And if I could urge the committee to look at my bill, the Pregnancy and Maternity Protection Bill, which would actually bring in protections very similar to those that are already in place in Germany to make sure that women who are pregnant and up to 6 months after they return from pregnancy, that they are not able to be made redundant in the first place. Too many women, we think around 50,000 women a year, leave their jobs when they're pregnant just because they are pregnant. And there's got to be a warning bell sent sharply to the government, and that's their own research that I'm quoting, that the law as it stands is not working and it needs to change.
Hannah.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the members who've led on this issue for many months and who've set out quite a lot of achievable solutions. And I think it's very clear that the pandemic has affected absolutely everybody in society, but new parents are experiencing particular acute, harsh point-in-time impacts because of the disruption to their plans, because of the disruption to services they would have enjoyed, because of lost opportunities to bond with family and in the wider community, because of interruption to their childcare plans, and certainly because of the financial hardship that many will experience. And the member for Newcastle upon Tyne North and others outlined some of the failings in provision and communication of protections for pregnant women in the workplace and on furlough, and I certainly endorse the recommendations of the committee and indeed those from Maternity Action. And unfortunately, those negative financial impacts will have extended to women who are self-employed, of course, many of whom have constructed their career in that way precisely to better balance their home and their work lives. And of course, no account was made for lost earnings due to maternity leave within the qualifying period, which has left a massive hole in the replacement income for many women and exacerbated the gender pay gap that already exists in that part of the economy. The threat against redundancy, as others have said, is an acute issue, and members will know that working mothers are already deeply exposed to redundancy or job downgrading, and the coming economic challenges alongside the catastrophic effects on childcare are really going to sharpen that risk. The advocacy group Pregnant Then Screwed, who've been relentless on this issue, report 11% of pregnant women being made or expecting to be made redundant in this period, and that's more than 20 times the instance in the general population, and over half of those believe that their pregnancy was a factor in that decision. This rises to 15% of working mothers, 46 of whom cite issues with childcare provision as a factor, and that was already a very marginal economic activity for providers and a huge cost for families. That's if you're lucky enough to be able to find a suitable provider. So in this context, the risk period in which women can bring forward employment tribunals certainly should be extended. But as members have said, possibly the most negative impacts will have been felt in the restrictions on partners attending antenatal and delivery sessions and in the immediate postpartum period. And while there's absolutely no doubt about the pressures and the challenges that healthcare providers are trying to balance, the regulations are deeply upsetting for many women at an acutely vulnerable time. The Royal College of Midwives have said that having a trusted birth partner present throughout labour is known to make significant difference to the safety and well-being of women in childbirth. When coronavirus is heightening anxiety, that reassurance is more important than ever, and particularly the changing and the variation of rules across trusts is creating even more anxiety, because what to expect when you're expecting can change more than once during a pregnancy. And again, while I appreciate this is due to obviously the ups and downs of pandemic advice in the community, such a crucial function, I believe, should be protected the way that, for example, we're protecting the ability of small children to go to school, and it should be among the very last restrictions to be made. Women who've just had babies need support in many different ways: to rest, to establish breastfeeding, in some cases to recover from major abdominal surgery, and of course just to figure out how to look after a newborn baby. And sometimes they'll need to stay in hospital for care and specific support, and the rules about partners and visitors are forcing some to choose between that hospital care and family care, and many will choose the latter and be discharged too soon, and that will have long-term impacts. Midwives and health visitors and volunteer groups, as others have outlined, are next to angels in that period in your journey as a parent for monitoring and for advice and for reassurance. And it's tragic that support won't have been available for many. And this year is going to have very long-term impacts for very many people, and new parents existing in isolation is going to be a big part of that. So it's going to take imagination and resources to put in place the measures that we can. We won't be able to do everything because of the pandemic restrictions, but the committee has outlined some of them. France, for example, has just doubled paternity leave allowance, so we have to make sure that we do the things that we can do within the restrictions. Thank you.
After the next honourable member, the time limit will be reduced to 4 minutes, but with 5 minutes, Mr. Tim Lawton.
Dame Ellen, it's a joy to be back in Westminster Hall. It's a joy to be the first bloke to speak in Westminster Hall after the lockdown, and it's an added bonus to have you here in the chair and to see so many colleagues suitably spaced out, as I think you referred to us earlier. But can I congratulate the Honourable Lady for Newcastle North for securing this debate and the report from her committee, and to have achieved over 230,000 signatures is no mean feat. Now, I can't speak with as much authority as the Honourable Lady for Lewisham, being so close to having a 4-month-old. I think I'm rather closer to being a prospective grandparent, but I speak as the chair of the all-party group on 1001 Critical Days, and I chair the Parent Infant Foundation charity. Now, others have spoken out already about the need for greater flexibility for maternity leave and paternity leave brought on by the particular factors and pressures during lockdown. And I agree with much of what is in the report and what the Honourable Lady has said. And it's been interesting, I think, that report is very much informed by the personal testimonies of parents, many new parents. Those extra pressures which parents have faced, the school closures, so if they have children already, they're facing having those children at home as well as going through pregnancy. The confusion for employers and employees about what they're actually entitled to at work, what is safe for them to be able to work during pregnancy, given the coronavirus considerations. The mixed access to childcare, as the Honourable Lady has said, and the added stress of not being able to have partners in hospital, crucial hospital appointments and scans, and in some cases even at birth, and in some really tragic cases, and I quote the case of Emma Kemsley from Saffron Walden, not even to have a partner at a termination when she found out at an 18-week scan that the baby would not survive outside the womb. It was doubly tragic. So these are exceptional circumstances. These are not ordinary times. But, Dame Eleanor, babies, I think, have become the forgotten part of the population during the pandemic. Over 330,000 babies have now been born in England during lockdown. Many new family members, many new parents have been isolated from extended family members. They haven't had the usual loving care and support of grandparents around them. We've had cases where babies, now exposed to other babies, have recoiled because they're just not used to babies. They've not been at those ante- and postnatal classes with the contact with other babies, so they're just not used to them. This is going to take a lot of normalising when we can get back into socialising, which is such an important part of a new baby's life and a new parent's life in particular. And the problem with health visitors, that only those vulnerable families, deemed vulnerable, have been permitted to have face-to-face contact with health visitors, such an important item of support in those early days. Also an important early warning system for things potentially going wrong. Many toddlers and children, early new babies, have not had those important early checks. And we hear that up to 70% of health visitors have been redeployed into other hospital and community settings during the pandemic. That is a really false economy where the impact that those health visitors can have so early on new parents in particular, is absolutely essential. Every year, 106,000 under 1-year-olds are exposed to domestic violence, parental substance misuse or severe mental ill health, yet only 15,000 of them are supported by social workers. The Parent Infant Foundation, which I chair, has produced a report jointly with Best Beginnings and Home Start called Babies in Lockdown. And that report showed that almost 7 in 10 parents felt the changes brought about by COVID were affecting their unborn baby or young child. Over 2/3 of respondents in the survey that we carried out said that overall their ability to cope with pregnancy or caring for their baby have been affected by COVID restrictions. And many families from lower income backgrounds, Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities and young parents have been hit harder by the COVID pandemic, and this is likely to widen the already deep inequalities in the early experience and life chances of children. So we recommended in the report a baby boost to enable local services to support families who've had a baby during or close to lockdown, and a new parent-infant premium, providing new funding for local commissioners targeted at improving outcomes for the most vulnerable children. Dame Eleanor, it's essential that those new babies and new parents in particular get the very best start in life, the best attachment to their children. So when they arrive at school, They are normalised, socialised, ready, greedy, eager to learn and to get on with their fellow children at school. It's a false economy not to be doing more.
Time limit now reduced to 4 minutes. Sarah Owens.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to start by thanking the member from Newcastle North for bringing this debate here today and by declaring an interest. I had a baby just before lockdown. So in the beginning of February, I gave birth to a beautiful little girl. And I want to express my thanks to all the new parents who signed this petition and have put it on the agenda here in Parliament today. Because I think throughout this pandemic, we've often talked about quite either very abstract things or very, very specific things like whether you should go to Barnard Castle and things like that. But what people really want us to be discussing is about what matters to them, the real life issues, whether it's, can I see my loved ones in a week's time? Will I be able to spend Eid or Christmas with my family? Can I celebrate my friend's wedding? Can I plan even my own wedding? Probably not right now. Can I be with my partner when they give birth? So I'm really glad that we've got a chance to talk about something that's real life and has a real life impact on people's lives today. And like the member for Lewisham West and Penge mentioned, for a lot of people, including myself, maternity stopped pretty much as COVID started. At 7 weeks, my partner, who's a teacher, was able to work from home, and therefore I was able to start work 7 weeks after our baby was born, and the need was great. As I think many people in this room, many MPs, many constituencies, saw a massive rise in casework and a massive need. And some of those people that took their time to write to their MPs were pregnant women, absolutely terrified about the prospect of having to give birth alone, having to have had scans, maternity appointments alone, or in very, very strange environments. And this is very difficult, particularly for people that have had difficult pregnancies, miscarriages before, and problems with their health. And it's almost a cliche to say that this crisis has laid bare so many underlying problems that has existed for far too long in this country, when we know that even before the pandemic, over 3,000 health visitors had been cut in the last 5 years alone. It's clear that social distancing, not being able to see each other face to face, will make it really hard for new mums to be able to get the support that they actually need. And we know this impacts the child, but it also impacts mothers especially. The expert work they do on such limited resource does help narrow some of the inequalities that we've already talked about. We know that 7 in 10 new mums might hide or underplay any struggles they're facing. I'd like to know if the Minister can tell us what the government's plans are to restore the vital health visitors we've lost over the last few years, and what the plan is to help babies and parents catch up on support they've missed during this pandemic, because it is absolutely vital. And when we talk about the very first stages in a child's life, we look to children's centres, nursery schools. All of these support mechanisms have taken a massive hit because of COVID, but they have stepped up. And I would ask the Minister whether he would readdress the situation that's currently happening in nursery schools, where they have not been reimbursed for any of their COVID costs, because that is an absolute disgrace. And we know by now that the confusion around government guidance has been muddled, but I'm really pleased to see that trusts have been enabled to have partners now come in to into maternity scans in particular. And I know that my own trust that covers Luton and Dunstable Hospital has also done that. But I'd like to ask the Minister what conversations he's had with those trusts, because 2 weeks ago I got a written answer that said that he had none. And that is deeply concerning, because trusts need to be enabled to do this. So thank you.
Laura Farris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the member for Luton South, for whom I'm full of admiration. When we first arrived in Parliament, I remember wondering whether any MP had fought their first parliamentary seat so heavily pregnant. I don't think so. But I'd also like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Newcastle North for her work on this issue. She's absolutely right to highlight the issues which underpin this petition. Many of them have been drawn to my attention by an organisation in my constituency, Health Watch West Berkshire, and they touch on points including, I think most importantly, the challenges that new mothers had during the period of lockdown, and if you'll forgive me, I will define that as between March and July of 2020, not being able to see close members of their family, not being able to meet up with their NCT groups if they were in one, not being able to go to a family or a children's centre. The support that we would wish for new mothers was not there. However, in my speech, I'd like to confine myself to the proposal in this petition, which is the right to extend paid maternity leave by a further 3 months to enable bonding and social engaging with other parents and babies through baby groups. I am not going to support this petition. I'll set out why, and I'll set out what else I think should be done. The first reason is that I'm not persuaded that this is the purpose of maternity leave. And to look at the statutory purpose, you do have to delve back into European law. The Pregnancy Workers Directive was what kicked the idea of maternity leave off in 1992. And the whole essence of that was about the well-being of the mother. It was about mandating member states to offer 14 weeks for the mother to make a physical recovery from childbirth. Now, in 2009, the European Union looked at it again, and they came up with very firm recommendations that member states should offer 18 weeks. In fact, they recommended 24. And what they said then was longer leave will have a positive impact on the mother's health. Our priority is to help women recover from giving birth and to create a solid relationship with her child. So maternity leave, very respectfully, does not and has never existed for wider developmental purposes, and I think we should be wary about asking for it to do so, particularly in this country where women have a right, a statutory right, to 52 weeks of ordinary plus additional maternity leave. I fully accept the extreme limitations that were proposed by the lockdown, but the reality was that wouldn't have been the entirety of any woman's maternity leave, and to the extent that childcare provision and other services are still limited, I'm not persuaded that their offering will have radically changed if we were to extend by 3 months to Christmas or even into the new year. My other point is that I am very, very worried about mothers asking for a further 3 months maternity leave, knowing how vulnerable they are in the workplace. In my experience, and I used to be an employment barrister, employers would find that an onerous requirement, and whilst they may not make her redundant while she's on leave or even when she recently returns, if she is caught in a redundancy exercise, say at the back end of 2021, she will find it very difficult to establish causation in an employment tribunal, and I'm concerned about that. But what I do think the government should do, and the conclusion I reached after 10 years of practice, is that the way to protect and enhance and progress women in the workplace is to embed flexible working practices. We have seen through this crisis how productive and effective people can be through doing their jobs at home. We've seen men doing it for the first time in jobs they never would have thought they could do from home. And we have recalibrated our view of flexible working, which can also mean working reduced hours, flexi working, job shares. So my view is that the answer to this is not in extending statutory leave, but embedding statutory flexibility in the workplace.
Should make it clear that there's no prohibition on interventions because we have this under here. We can have a robust debate. It's absolutely fine for that to happen. John Howell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I hope nobody is going to take that advice to have a go at me. But if they do, they do. They do. Let me say how delighted I am to participate in this debate, and I thank the member for Newcastle upon Tyne North for initiating it. There are just 3 points that I want to raise, and I raise them in the spirit of asking the Minister to look at these again to make sure that we are doing everything that is possible to make sure that everything works extremely well. And the first one is in relation to childcare. Now, I fully accept that childcare is desperately important to ensure that there is the opportunity for people on maternity or paternity leave to go back to work. I fully accept that. But I pick up the point that the Honourable Member for Lewisham West made and that the Honourable Member for East Worthing made, that it's very important for the children themselves. I too have come across children who have been born in or just before the lockdown period, but have been immersed in lockdown, who find it really difficult not just to engage with other children, but to engage with anyone outside of their immediate family. And I think that is such a sad thing to experience that I'm not quite sure what the answer is, except to build flexibility in and to make sure that we have the right sort of understanding people that are running the nurseries that are there. The second group of people that I would ask the Minister to look at to see whether we are doing the right thing for them is the self-employed. There are a large number of self-employed here in the UK, but we know that there are certain things that we haven't done right. Can it be right that about half of self-employed, just under half, have had to give up a place at nursery in order to carry on living? And can it be right that we ask the self-employed to be able to take into account the things that other people do not have to take into account, particularly those that are employed. And the final point that I would make is for those people that are employed. And I know that the Minister or one of his associates has raised the question of how companies deal with people who are on maternity or paternity leave. But it is still, as many speakers have suggested, it is still an area that is open to abuse. We still see a large number of suspensions that are being done on incorrect terms, for example. We still see a large number of people that are employed in unsafe conditions. And I wonder whether it is worth for getting together a group of leaders in this field to make sure that the key messages that we want to get across are really understood and are spread out across the companies so that they do things in the right way. We're not asking for anything special, but we're asking that things are done in the right way.
Thank you very much, Dame Eleanor. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And just in commencing my contribution to this debate, I want to pay more wholesome tribute to the Honourable Lady for Newcastle North and indeed members of the Petitions Committee. It is rather extraordinary that the Petitions Committee had an inquiry at all. It's not a common thing to do, but I think being met not only of the strength of feeling for this petition and the almost 250,000 signatories and the fact that Westminster Hall was not accepting e-petition debates, I think it was an incredibly powerful thing to do. And I'm glad that the Petitions Committee not only did it, but proceeded with a very robust and a very encouraging report, one which was compelling to read and made arguments that I have yet to hear substantive rebuttal for. So I do wish to thank the Honourable Lady, Dame Eleanor. And I've no doubt that the Minister present enjoyed the evidence session. I think it was rather robust, and I have to say I have found the Minister to be personally engaging in this issue. But I have not found the Government to be anything other than tone deaf to the genuine aspirations that have been raised by mothers, by the concerns raised by mothers and the wider family circle, to the imperatives that have been raised about supporting young mothers, young babies, and the wider family at a time when we've all had difficulties, and yet the response, I'm afraid to say, was wholly insufficient. And I think, aside from the contribution from the Honourable Lady for Newbury, I think there is a general reflection around the debate this afternoon that more can be done, and said she wasn't denying that, just the intended purpose of the petition. But I do ask, particularly, Dame Eleanor, given that we are entering potentially another period of restrictions within wider society, that we're entering another period of potential lockdown and circuit breakers, that government at least accept this afternoon that this is not an issue that has gone away, that the pressures that manifested themselves in huge levels of public support through the e-petition, in the contributions that we have made in Parliament, through the committee's report and the subsequent report in September, that government accept that this isn't over. That families, those who are pregnant currently, those who are at the early stages of maternity leave, are still looking for government, who have heard further work being brought forward on support for the Job Support Scheme, and other measures which can be taken to support individuals throughout society, that mothers and families still remain in a difficult space. Health visitation, no matter how hard professionals have tried to respond to the needs of those under their care, are still not providing the best support that they would wish to give, are still relying on online engagement and Zoom calls when actually face-to-face contact, getting to see mother, baby and the wider surroundings within the family setting are so crucially important. It's all still constrained. Madam Deputy Speaker, Dame Eleanor, I was pleased to ask the Prime Minister on the 23rd of July when government intended to respond to the Petitions Committee inquiry. And the Prime Minister responded saying he remembered Bethany from Crewe very well. He responded to indicate that he would consider the report and its contents. I don't think anyone who surveyed the evidence in the Hansard transcripts of the Liaison Committee could believe that there was appropriate consideration of the 23 recommendations brought forward. That time hasn't passed. The opportunity still remains. And in the name of the 638 members of my own constituency who signed this petition and the hundreds of thousands of people throughout this country, I hope government do listen.
House.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is good to be back, and I also want to congratulate the Honourable Member from Newcastle North for bringing this as the first debate to this chamber. The government response to this petition so far has been disappointing. Far too many new parents have felt completely unsupported through what should be a time to bond with their newborn child. And I urge ministers to reconsider their response, extend parental leave and pay for families during the pandemic. The government claims that the UK is amongst the most generous countries in the world in terms of parental leave. In practice, that is untrue. In fact, in UNICEF's ranking of family-friendly policies, the UK ranks only 34 out of 41 OECD countries. And as highlighted in the Petitions Committee report, the unpaid section of parental leave is simply unaffordable for many parents. As always, it is those who are already more disadvantaged who lose out. But this is not just about the generosity of parental leave in the UK. Of course, we should have that discussion, and it clearly deserves our attention, because, of course, we can do a lot better. But today, the government needs to consider the impact that the loss of access to vital services, including health visitors, has had on families during COVID. And it leads me to the subject of mental health. The first 12 months are vital for a new baby. There's an enormous amount of physical but also emotional development. Undiagnosed mental health problems in parents can have significant, long-lasting consequences for a newborn child. And I speak as the chair of the APPG on adverse childhood experiences. It is crucial that we understand what can affect a child's health from the start and take a trauma-informed approach to building back from this pandemic. Depression before, during and after birth is a serious condition. It can go unrecognized and untreated for nearly half of new mothers who suffer from it. And this has been the case, of course, also before the pandemic. And my APPG has recommended an extension of actually making sure that new mums get a 6-week mental health check. One of the problems is the narrative that motherhood is only wonderful, which leaves many women feeling unable to talk to health professionals about their emotional state. And my own pregnancies and birth are a long time ago now, but I remember, I didn't dare to say that actually I felt rubbish. But because, it's often very difficult to cope. And this was true before the pandemic. It was true for, many years ago. COVID has only created additional challenges. 68% of new parents have said their ability to cope with pregnancy or caring for their baby has been affected by lockdown restrictions. Not only has informal support from friends and family been much more difficult, and we have heard many examples of this in this debate already, but formal services have been cut down too. In the long term, we need to ensure that mental health checks for mothers are actually taking place across England and Wales. I also support the call that government should fund and provide additional targeted mental health support. It should certainly provide more funding to increase the number of health visitors. And again, I remember the health visitor was just such a lifeline. And that contact is so, so important for new mums. All of this is necessary if we are to avoid a whole lost generation because of the COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Dame Eleanor. It's a pleasure to serve under you in the chair this afternoon in such an important debate. And I also thank the 337 petitioners from my constituency of York Central who signed that petition. The petition aimed at making things right and getting things right for parents. I just want to start by putting on record how important it is to support women through their pregnancy. And I ask the Minister to take back to his colleagues in the health team how essential it is that birthing partners and fathers are able to accompany the woman through her pregnancy throughout all antenatal care, scans and hospital appointments, right through to birth and any care required after birth. However, this afternoon I just want to touch on two key issues. First, thanking, of course, the Petitions Committee for its reports and its 23 recommendations, and want to reflect on that in this short speech that I have. Firstly, on the issue of neonatal care. I have had a constituent, a mother, write to me who gave birth 11 weeks early during this pandemic. So difficult, not least when her baby was moved to Middlesbrough, now in lockdown. She and her family need to be able to spend the appropriate time, of course, to nurture and be with their baby. However, bringing forward the neonatal leave by 2 years would really assist, and to bring that forward now even more so would assist her. And I ask the government, in the way that they have moved at light speed to bring in so many measures, to bring in this important measure to support families at their time of need. April 2023 is too late. However, the second issue I want to look at as chair of the APPG on adoption and permanence is the inequality that we see between adoptive parents and birth parents that currently exist, and ask the Minister to take another look at that inequality, not least in the government's response to the Petitions Committee report. We know that, for instance, self-employed adoptive parents are not entitled to an equivalent to the maternity allowance which self-employed mothers can access. They can ask the local authority for support, they don't have to get that, and of course it's means tested, unlike birth parents. Also in the 2016 independent review of self-employed in the UK, it highlighted this disadvantage, yet 4 years on there has been no redress, and I ask government why. I also want to pick up on the issue of special guardians who are currently not entitled to any form of parental leave or pay, and yet fulfil that crucial role of parenting, and how this creates a real inequality. Research shows that around half of kinship carers have to give up work to care for their children, so we must see change. And I thank my honourable friend, the member for Newcastle upon Tyne North, who published her excellent report last week about the real hardship that kinship parents face. Therefore, we need to see a real change. Labour would have introduced a year of maternity pay and leave following best practice, and therefore we need to get it right for all parents. Therefore, I want to urge the Minister to bring forward proposals in order to ensure there is no inequality between adopters and special guardians and birth parents, because for many of those parents, the issue of bonding with their child, addressing the issues of attachment, are so important if we are going to see these families succeed and thrive in the future. And therefore, despite the response from government, I ask them to revisit these issues and ensure that we can create strong families into the future. Thank you.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Dame Anna. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair today, and I welcome the opportunity to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on maternity and paternity leave. As many members will know, and as we've heard today, being a new parent is an exciting, a scary, and of course a tiring experience. It's rather like being a new member here, isn't it? But as well as being a new parent, being a challenge at the best of times, when you have the support of extended family, when you're able to send baby groups, when you're able to leave your home as and when you please, we know actually to have a newborn baby, as we've heard in the middle of the lockdown, is all those challenges multiplied. And that's why we need ministers to recognise the unprecedented experience of those who have become parents during the pandemic. We've seen various offers of support to schemes, but those on maternity and paternity leave have had no such offers made. And it's time we actually did something on that, because, of course, as we know, during the time this petition has been waiting to be debated, I'm very pleased that we're back open here today. Many of the parents affected have had their maternity or paternity leave pass them by, and they're now grappling with the challenges of childcare during the pandemic. Some of those who have contacted me have had very supportive employers. That's welcome, but of course it's not a guarantee. And I've heard from other constituents who have not been able to access childcare having to consider whether they can return to their jobs at all, and others who have had no choice but to take unpaid leave. The government have previously suggested the option of people being furloughed if childcare cannot be sought, and I personally don't think that is at all the right answer. And when the Prime Minister said he would expect employers to be reasonable in those circumstances, and that would be sufficient, I think that betrayed a lack of understanding from him about the reality of workplace discrimination. And for those who've returned to work, they've experienced a significant portion of their maternity leave during the national lockdown. The possibilities to see extended family and friends and to attend COVID-secure baby groups has opened up, but there's no guarantee, and I think we've already heard it's very unlikely that's going to be able to continue in a way we would want to. And we've already seen with localised lockdowns, inter-house mixing has gone for many already. And I think we can see how that affects people on a day-to-day basis. A comment I received from a constituent really struck with me. She said, "Some days are so difficult, I barely slept, the house is a mess, there's a huge pile of washing to be done, and all I need is my mum to come round and hold my son whilst I do this." And it's often those very simple, helpful, small interactions that can make all the difference. Baby groups and support from family and friends not only benefit new parents, but are vital for the development of new babies who are looking to interact and form new bonds. And there will be babies who have had only their parents' contact, have not met other babies, and will take time to adapt to new childcare settings. And the thought of that, even, never mind actually doing it, is quite a traumatic experience for parents and their babies. And of course we know, as we've discussed already, the absolute challenge the early years can have on the rest of a child's development. So those who have given birth during the pandemic and those who are pregnant at present haven't continued to contend with restrictions on attendance to scans, medical appointments and access to services. I've heard from constituents who felt a void from being unable to see their health visitor in person and have been left in pain and distressed by being unable to receive support from breastfeeding services. Maternity leave should offer new parents the opportunity to recover from birth and time to adapt to the challenges of a newborn. New parents are having to catch up on missed appointments at the same time as they are returning to work. There are many practical implications on this, and it's well documented the discrimination women on maternity leave or returning from it face. And as we've heard today, those difficulties are exacerbated in the worst of times. So we know it's not business as usual at the moment, so why should it be business as usual for maternity and paternity leave? We should have some changes before it's too late.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and my thanks first of all to the Petitions Committee, to the Honourable Member for Newcastle North for bringing this debate, to the maternity petitioners, to Bethany, to Maternity Action and Pregnant and Screwed, and everybody who has been looking out to try and help people at this incredibly difficult time. And it's had an impact on my own family as well. My sister-in-law Suzanne had a baby Fraser during lockdown, and I understand they may be watching this at home. And like all parents, they've been doing their absolute best in the very most difficult of circumstances, and we're all so very proud of everything that they've done so far. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it doesn't have to be this hard. And I think if the Government took on some of the recommendations made by the Petitions Committee in their report, it would certainly make it a good deal easier for many parents and many families right around the UK in order to look after their wee ones and make things just that wee bit easier at this very, very difficult time. And in my role through the All-Party Group on Infant Feeding and Inequalities, we have seen over the past 5 years a worsening of an already precarious situation in terms of underfunded services, in terms of a patchwork of local support, in terms of volunteer groups doing their very, very best with very few resources, Madam Deputy Speaker, to support people when they're breastfeeding. And
there has been a report come out just in recent days by Dr. Natalie Schenker and Professor Amy Brown, which gets to some of this, and they surveyed over 1,200 mothers who breastfed during the pandemic to see how they were affected by lockdown. And for around 40% of those mothers, they said it had been a positive experience because they valued the privacy, the time at home, perhaps having a supportive partner there, perhaps giving that wee bit of extra time to do things. But around 30% of mothers surveyed felt lockdown had been incredibly negative and incredibly difficult for them. They'd felt isolated, abandoned, overwhelmed at the intensity of being alone with a baby for that length of time. And while many of them were able to breastfeed through that, many were not and struggled and gave up before they wanted to. And the survey found that of those participants who had stopped breastfeeding, only 13.5% described themselves as ready to do so. They'd given up before they had wanted to. Others had introduced a formula when they hadn't intended to, 68.7%, with many of those doing that earlier than they had planned to. And in terms of their decision to stop breastfeeding, a staggering 70.3% attributed a lack of face-to-face support to their decision to stop. And some of that has been because of the lockdown and the restrictions that are there, Madam Deputy Speaker. But there could have been a lot more done by the government to put things in place to make that easier. The National Breastfeeding Helpline have done incredible work through their volunteers to try and help support people. But there are some problems, Madam Deputy Speaker, that you really need a person standing next to you to help you with when you're feeding a baby. And I think the government needs to do a lot more to resolve the issues of underfunding, the issues around health visitors, which have meant that people have felt very, very alone, very scared, on their own with a baby for a long period of time. And it's also worsened existing inequalities within the system. So black, Asian, minority ethnic people, people in poverty, people who are living in small flats with no gardens, people who have less educational attainment, they all found it more difficult to pursue breastfeeding when they really wanted to. And I would ask the Minister to look at these issues very carefully and see what more can be done to help support people, not just now, but in the future as well, because funding must go into these services.
Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Dame Eleanor. It's always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I begin by thanking honourable colleagues for the contributions they've made, the petitioners for obviously raising this petition in the first place, and especially, as others have done, the Honourable Lady from Newcastle North on the work of her committee in bringing this issue to us today. I think that there's an issue where we can't underestimate the impact it has on so many people, and it was really encouraging to see so many sharing their experiences in record numbers with the inquiry. There can be few issues more important to society than how we look after the health and well-being of pregnant women and new parents and newborn children. So it is great to see the matter prioritised on the first day back here in Westminster Hall. It is a great pity that the UK Government's response to the recommendation so far has been more of a shrug of our shoulders than a helping hand, and I very much hope that the Minister is here today with a renewed vigour for action, simply saying that we have the best or amongst the best and most generous systems in the world won't really cut it, and will those struggling financially. And while maternity allowances are far from generous, and UNICEF ranks the UK amongst the least family-friendly of the world's richest countries, and it's a worrying thought that, unbound by EU minimums, that perhaps we may see that under threat. The government response so far to this report suggests that they have either not grasped or are not concerned about the extent of COVID-19 on the lives and livelihoods of pregnant women and new parents, and it should be an easy decision, really, to extend maternity leave by 3 months at the very least, to make sure those who have unfairly lost income, lost leave rights, lost access to health and dentistry service, to baby groups, to family and childcare support are not disadvantaged even further. I think it's safe to say that the Prime Minister is in a beneficial position of undoubtedly being able to enjoy the benefits of having a newborn baby around through this period. I mean, it certainly brings so much joy in a period of difficulty. However, it would be difficult to argue that he would be able to perhaps share the experience with those who are struggling with poverty, low wages, insecure work, loss of access to healthcare support, to those facing discriminatory attitudes from an employer. We've heard from other members those who've seen their roles downgraded on return. In a survey of almost 20,000 mothers and pregnant women by the campaign group Pregnant and Screwed, 46% of those being made redundant blamed a lack of childcare provision due to the Covid-19 pandemic. And there are thousands of real experience summarised in the committee report, which will hopefully persuade the Minister of the need for a more sympathetic response as we look to move forward. So far, the Government has been sluggish in responding to the recommendations in the report, waiting until September before even coming out to say no to most of them. We know that they can rush to react when they want to. They didn't, for example, drag their heels in any shape or form when it came to getting rid of procurement rules, so they could splash billions of public money on questionable contracts to private companies of their choosing, regardless of evidence of ability to carry out the job. But when it comes to the relatively small and inexpensive fixes that would ensure fairness for pregnant women and new parents, it's a far slower response. Measures like making sure guidance for employers and employees is clear would stop people struggling unnecessarily to save on the need for costly, time-consuming tribunals. On the 16th of March, the Government announced that pregnant women at work were especially vulnerable, but they did nothing to make clear the legal obligations under existing health and safety rules that if alternative safe work or work from home could not be provided, then they should be able to be suspended on full pay. Instead, many women were wrongly forced into sick pay, unpaid leave, or forced to use up their holiday entitlement or start their maternity leave early. For many, this affected their entitlement to statutory maternity pay and reduced their maternity leave when they needed it most. The Government could have prevented this, but they chose to leave these things in a murky mess, which will allow pregnant women rights to be ignored with impunity. Unsurprisingly, when asked how many employees the Health and Safety Executive have investigated and taken enforcement action against for breaching obligations to pregnant women since March, the answer was none. This pandemic has been a wake-up call for so many, and an opportunity, I think, where we could have seen the Government respond to the very detailed inquiry that was undertaken by the Petitions Committee. And I'll finish with this, Madam Chair. On the 8th of April, the Chancellor said, "When you need it, when you fall in hard times, we'll be there for you." Well, I urge the Government today, even at this late stage, to prove actions and not words that are there for new parents.
Dan Carden.
Thank you, Dame Eleanor. It's a delight to respond on behalf of the opposition and to see you back in the chair in Westminster Hall. And I'd like to start, like others have, by thanking Jessie Zammett and her husband James for starting this E-Petition and the 226,000 people who signed it. And I'd also like to pay particular tribute to my friend for Newcastle upon Tyne North, who, as others have pointed out, really took this issue forward and delivered what is a really important report that I hope government will, beyond today, take the issues within it far more seriously and give us a much better indication of additional support for parents and families as we head into what is no doubt going to be an even harder winter of coronavirus. Can I also briefly, before I get into the points, just thank all members for their contributions today, but particularly on my own side, I thought we had excellent contributions by the member for Lewisham West and Penge, Newcastle upon Tyne North, my friend, Luton North, York Central and Ellesmere Port and Neston. Even before the pandemic struck, the system of support did not work as it should. There are too many inconsistencies in the support provided between employed and self-employed parents, or biological and adoptive parents, as we've heard, that cause them to miss out on vital support that is incredibly important at that time in their lives. These existing flaws have been exacerbated by COVID-19, leaving many in hardship and families struggling. And in the government's response to the petition and the subsequent report, it acknowledges that we're living through unprecedented times, yet does little more than express satisfaction with maternity and paternity support as they were before. The number of signatories to the petition, I think, speaks to the importance of this time and for the well-being of parents and children, as well as a real frustration with the inadequacy of the current provisions, and the government's failure to provide sufficient additional support in light of the pandemic. The report explains why the government's claim to provide amongst the most generous support in the world is quite simply untrue, also a point challenged by UNICEF that has been mentioned. And the Petitions Committee report calls on government to capture data on the uptake of parental leave, as well as pay, so that any future review of parental leave arrangements can consider the extent to which parents from all groups are able to use their entitlements, and whether to extend leave or provide hardship grants in light of that evidence. And I think that is a really important call for the Minister to take on today. The UK has seen a rapid growth in self-employment in recent decades, so it is of great concern that the significant disparities exist between employed and self-employed women. Self-employed women already face additional challenges and reduced incomes after having children. If both parents are self-employed, only the mother can claim an allowance, and there is no paternity or shared leave for fathers, meaning caring responsibilities fall to the mother. The entitlements available to self-employed women compound rather than address this inequality. And unlike statutory maternity pay, maternity allowance is treated as unearned income and deducted from universal credit, sometimes leaving them up to £5,000 worse off. Can the Minister give any justification for this unfair discrepancy? And I would call him to set out how the government will address it. This is just one of the many inequalities and entitlements brought about by an inconsistent welfare system combined with an increase in precarious work. The government has pursued an agenda of creating a deregulated gig economy, rolling back workers' rights, fostering insecurity in work, which has left us in the worst possible position as we now face the devastation wreaked on the economy by coronavirus. Following the Prime Minister and the Chief Medical Officer's announcement in March that pregnant women were clinically vulnerable, employers that were unable to make necessary adjustments to ensure workplace safety were required to send them home on full pay. But many pregnant women were unlawfully put on statutory sick pay, affecting their maternity pay and other entitlements. And Labour has previously called on the government to discount COVID-related spells on SSP for the period that their earnings are used to calculate statutory maternity pay, to ensure that pregnant women do not have their maternity pay cut as a result of being on SSP. It is unacceptable that the government has refused to do this, and I ask the Minister, will he reconsider? In fact, Minister said women affected should simply bring about an employment tribunal claim against their employer, despite knowing this is not a realistic option, given the small window of opportunity to do so and the huge and growing backlog in employment tribunal cases. Citizens' Advice has said that their advisors are seeing worrying cases where pregnant women feel that they have been selected for redundancy because they need more stringent health and safety measures. Demand for their discrimination advice pages has increased fourfold. I want to echo the report's recommendation that the government should consider extending the period in which pregnant women and new parents may bring claims before the Employment Tribunal to 6 months. Just last week, new figures from the Ministry of Justice displayed a 31% rise in outstanding Employment Tribunal cases on an increase in unemployment due to COVID-19. And it also warned the government that the decision to end the job retention scheme and replace it with the job support scheme will lead to a further spike at the end of October. With 1 in 4 people already living under regional lockdowns and a second national lockdown a very real possibility, the issues highlighted by the petition, the report and in this debate are not going away. And it's simply not acceptable for the government to simply restate that the support available is generous and sufficient. The evidence submitted to the Petitions Committee inquiry shows this not to be the case. Substantive ministerial action is now needed, and I would call on the Ministers to set out what steps the government intends to take, considering the problems facing pregnant women and new parents detailed by honourable members today. It is simply an unfairness that too many have lost their leave during this period of lockdown, and the government should look to what action can be taken. And I would say that the issues raised here today are not simply going to be dealt with in this debate, but require action from government. Thank you, Dame Eleanor.
Minister Paul Scully.
Thank you very much, Dame Eleanor, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd first of all like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Newcastle North and her Petitions Committee for bringing this forward, and the way that she has conducted and really reflected the campaign of the many petitioners that are supporting this. As she knows, I sat on the Petitions Committee for a number of years, and I know from personal experience how important and valuable that committee is. I'm sure we can agree it's been an interesting and informative debate, and I'm grateful to everybody that's contributed to it. We've had, from this side of the chamber, the Honourable Lady from Basingstoke, the Honourable Member for East Worthing and Shoreham, whose previous experience in this place has really showed up in their comments. We had the Honourable Gentleman for Henley, who's always common sense that he speaks, and rational, reasonable thinking cutting through these issues was very welcome. And of course, my honourable friend, the member from Newbury, who, although she's not been in this place for a long time, I think she's got a great future ahead of her, and bringing that professional approach, her experience to bear on this was a particularly insightful and welcome contribution. Now, obviously, the online petition asked a government to extend maternity pay because of concerns about the lack of opportunities for parents and mothers in particular throughout the lockdown, and petitioners did point out the activities such as baby groups which were unable to during the lockdown, and how they're vital for children's development, and we've heard a lot of that in this debate now. But first of all, as a father myself, I know how important social contact is with family, friends and other new parents. It's been quite a while since my children were in that position, being in their 20s now, but in the first early months and the first years of your child's life, I do vaguely remember those days a couple of decades ago, just how important that is. And that contact does provide invaluable support at a time of significant change. And I do sympathise with new mothers and parents who are unable to spend their parental leave in the way that they envisaged prior to the pandemic and lockdown. And I recognise that new parents want to give their children the best possible start in life. It's what we all want. And I wholeheartedly agree that activities that support babies' developments in those early months and years are so important. We're all social creatures, including from a very young age. Social contact is important at all stages. But obviously, since that initial period of lockdown, we have tried our best to be able to relax the social distancing rules that were previously in place, with stricter measures, yes, in some local areas, as required. But as a result of those relaxations, including the introduction of support bubbles, more new parents are now able to spend time with family, friends and other new parents while still respecting the social distancing rules. The online petition that prompted the Petitions Committee's inquiry and this debate asked for paid maternity leave to be extended by 3 months in light of Covid-19. As you've heard, the government has not accepted the proposal. Maternity leave is provided to enable employed pregnant women and new mothers to prepare for and recover from birth and bond with their child, including through breastfeeding if the mother wishes to breastfeed. Up to 52 weeks of maternity leave are available, 39 weeks of which are paid, and all employed women must take at least 2 weeks of maternity leave immediately after giving birth, or 4 weeks if they work in a factory. Fathers and partners can take up to 2 weeks of paid paternity leave. They can also access up to additional 50 weeks of leave and up to additional 37 weeks of pay where the mother doesn't intend to use her full maternity entitlement. And employed parents also have access to up to 4 weeks unpaid parental leave. And that is per parent, not child. So a couple that wishes to take per parent, per child. So a couple that wishes to take additional time off work with their baby have access to additional 8 weeks of leave per year, more if they have other children. I know that this leave isn't paid, but it is also the case that all employees have access to 5.6 weeks of paid holiday through year. The entitlement to annual leave continues to accrue while a parent is off work on parental year. We've talked a lot about in this debate about the data in comparison, the international comparisons. I think it's important to look at the fact that the maternity leave, rather than parental leave, that some people suggested, which is a day one right, is one of the most generous in the OECD. It's also, when you look at the time of it compared to the money per week, per month, there are other countries which have a shorter period but maybe pay more money. But often they are combined with social insurance, so it's dependent on the contributions that the employers and the employees have to have already paid in. I will briefly give way, but I've only got a short period of time.
I thank you for giving way. Very briefly, it is the unpaid part that is not generous and is so unaffordable. Can you please respond to that?
Well, I say it's the overall aspect of the right balance between in terms of maternity leave, between the time and the money that we believe is both generous and fair, and they get that right balance as a day one right. The Honourable Lady for Newcastle North, member for Newcastle North, talked about what we are doing to look forward about care in the early years, and the Prime Minister has asked the Right Honourable Lady, Andrew Levison's, Northampton North South. There you go. Got to get the right bit of Northampton right. We've asked. He's asked the Right Honourable Lady to carry out a review into how to improve health outcomes for babies and children from disadvantaged backgrounds. That review is going to focus on the first 1,001 days of a baby's life from birth to age 2.5, and from a sedentary position, the Honourable Member for Newcastle North says she is on that committee. So fantastic. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of that and what recommendations come forward. Turning to the issues of social groups for parents and children, I know how important baby and toddler groups are to new parents and babies, and how distressing it has been for parents to suffer through lockdown. But the honourable gentleman for member for Worthing, my friend from Worthing, talked about GPs and what GPs could and couldn't do in terms of health visits. There's a contractual requirement from the 1st of April 2020 for GPs to offer maternal postnatal consultation at 6 to 8 weeks after birth. That's live and stillbirth, as an additional appointment to that for the first 6 to 8 weeks of baby check. And the government gave an additional £12 million invested through the GP contract to support all practices to deliver this. The issue of mental health came up, and clearly this is a concerning time for mothers, and it's important that as we talk about giving mental health as a parity to physical health, that we are committed to supporting everyone's mental well-being, especially during this unprecedented period. So new parents can continue to access mental health services, including virtually, and the Department for Health and Social Care have released more tailored guidance to help people deal with this outbreak. I won't give way because I've literally only got 1 minute, because I want the Honourable Lady to actually be able to respond to this. There's no way I'm going to be able to justify all of the or talk about all of the comments in the minutes that I have left. But as I said in the response to the core of the petition, the government believes that the entitlement to 52 weeks of maternity leave and 39 weeks of statutory maternity pay or maternity allowance is already very generous. But I should perhaps add that these entitlements are provided to enable pregnant women and new mothers to prepare for and recover from birth and bond with their child. So that's what I'm saying, that we need to make sure that as we relax lockdown, there are new opportunities for new parents to spend their maternity, paternity, adoption leave and shared parental leave in the way that they had envisaged it, spending that prior to the pandemic. The recent relaxations have only been possible because we took the difficult decision to introduce that stringent social distancing measures, including lockdown. In fact, as we're now learning, we still need to be vigilant and maintaining social distancing in order to protect lives. So in conclusion, can I just thank the petitioners? We will continue to work on those first early years to make sure that we can make sure that parents and children can get the support that they want.
Catherine McKinnell.
Speaker, I appreciate
the Minister's response, but I think the petitioners will be incredibly disappointed in it. And I have to say to the Minister, he's talking about the relaxation of lockdown, but he's talking to somebody for whom the additional local restrictions apply. So most of that doesn't apply to new mums in my area and many parts of the country who are increasingly affected. I just wanted to highlight a couple of issues from the debate. The Right Honourable Member for Basingstoke, I love the way she challenged the fact that our report didn't go far enough and didn't demand enough of the government. I very much agree with her campaign, but it highlights in this report how we try to be reasonable and ensure cross-party support and deliverable asks of the government, which is what makes it more disappointing that most of them have been ignored. I also wanted to just flag up the impressive speech by the Honourable Member for Newbury, but it seems to ignore the reality for many working mothers that they don't have the agency to negotiate flexibility, and they are deeply anxious throughout their maternity period during this lockdown about the future of their employment situation. And I just want to make one final plea, because I didn't mention it, it's not in our report, but I very much support the calls of all new mothers to be able to have that flexibility to take birth partners with them into the hospital. I want the Prime Minister to respond, as he promised at the Liaison Committee, more fully to our report and to make the changes necessary to ensure that every mother can have the confidence of a birth partner with them in hospital.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered E-Petition 306691 relating to the impact of COVID-19 on maternity and parental leave. As many as that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Thank you all very much for responding so well to the new way in which we are doing things in Westminster Hall. I will just delay for a moment or two while people taking part in the current debate can leave by the one-way system and out that way, while continuing to be 2 metres apart, which everyone is doing absolutely beautifully. Thank you very much indeed. And as they go round and out that way, I am hoping that the people who are going to take part in the next debate will be coming in. I'm just going very slowly to make sure that this happens. And I'm very pleased to see that